Hi, we're here today with Tom Chilton, one of the lead devs on World of Warcraft, with the new expansion Warlords of Draenor. We've got some questions for him today. First thing I want to ask is just to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role with Blizzard.
Right. So my name's Tom Chilton, and I'm the game director for WoW. I sometimes summarize that as being the last defense against bad ideas, sort of the goalie. Because we have a really large team of really passionate, dedicated people that have been working on the game for, in many cases, many years. Ideas come from everywhere, and it's up to the team to put it together into a cohesive package that people enjoy.
And how long have you been working on Warcraft yourself?
Well, since early 2004, so about 10 months or so before we launched the game. Came in as a senior game designer coming from Ultima Online, so working on MMOs before that, and really just kind of helping out with the design of a lot of different things like character classes, PvP, the talent system, auction house, mailing things back and forth, the mail system, stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you. One question we do have, do you have a favourite race or class that you play?
Well, I tend to cycle through them at different points in each expansion. I really have a lot of, favorites. I've played Gnome, I've played Undead, I've played Tauren, I've played Orc, I played Human, I played Worgen. I think that probably sums up. I haven't played very much Night Elf, a little bit of it, but those are mostly the ones I've played. But a lot of favorites.
Excellent. So moving on to the actual expansion, I know you've said you've started this since 2004, and you worked on the original Burning Crusade expansion as well. Then, was it nice to revisit that world of Draenor again, and with a kind of familiarity about it and what you've learned since the first expansion?
Definitely was. I mean, I had been an avid Warcraft fan from long before I came to Blizzard also, and so it's not only is it cool to revisit a place that we've sort of touched on in World of Warcraft, it was also really cool to be able to explore this area that had never been done in WoW, but was clearly steeped in Warcraft history. So that's been really awesome. I think that players are really going to enjoy and appreciate the kind of the depth that there is now in Draenor. Frankly, when I look back at Burning Crusade, there's way more to it now in Draenor than there was in Burning Crusade, which is kind of interesting because you kind of figure that with Outland it was this shattered remnant of what was Draenor, and so in some ways it actually kind of makes sense that in the Outland version of it that there's almost less to it because so much had been lost from it being destroyed. But it feels really cool now to go back and actually see so much of that.
Are we likely to see some familiar faces and places from the Burning Crusade?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only from the Burning Crusade, but from other points in time with World of Warcraft. For example, you can see Mankirk, the orc from the Baron's Quest series. Yeah, he's a child in Nagrand.
I look forward to that. I always did find his wife at the end.
Yep.
So it was quite interesting with regards to the timeline on this. Obviously, it's more of an alternate timeline than following the progression that you've done previously. What was the thinking behind kind of shifting that focus that way?
Well, the thinking behind that was really that Warcraft is more about setting than it is about plot. And this setting of where the orcs came from is something that the team very much wanted to explore. We really wanted to kind of envision what that would be and give the players opportunity to have a glimpse into that world. So once we have it in our heads that was the setting that we thought would be really cool for players to play in, at that point afterwards we figure out, okay, well, what plot devices are needed to make that work. But in reality the plot stuff kind of fades into the background, and the setting and the kind of the races and the creatures that are there in Draenor really are what take the foreground. So I think in the end, playing it works.
I guess one of the big features for it isn't going to be the new updated character models. Everyone's been asking for them for a long time. Did you have any worries about doing them? I mean, personally, I've got some characters that are older than my children. I'm not sure they necessarily want them to look different anymore. I've kind of got used to them. So what was the thinking there?
And honestly, it is terrifying for exactly that reason. We didn't feel like any other MMO in history had ever actually done this successfully. All the ones that had done graphical updates in the past, we felt like had kind of fallen short of what they wanted to accomplish. And so it's been so important for us to really, more than anything else, retain the soul of the character, translating from the old to the new. We really want for when you log in and you see that character on the character sheet that you're like, yeah, that's him. That's my guy, right? So, yeah, totally. So that's a value for us, and if we don't accomplish that, then we will have failed. I think that as we continue to progress through it, there are places where players have helped us identify where hey, this is what my face looked like before. Here's after. It doesn't really quite match up, and really trying to address those one at a time. And make sure we get it right. I think there are some races where there's more sensitivity behind it than others. Certainly with humans, anything that is more human-like, players are more in tune with exactly how their face looked. Yeah, totally. Whereas when you're looking at a Tauren, it's like, yeah, okay, sure.
I guess the other big point on the new one is the Garrisons as well. I mean, I guess that's kind of a response slightly to the long requests for player housing. Is that kind of where it came from, or has it just kind of organically come from elsewhere?
Yeah, it organically came from just some jam sessions we had for trying to figure out, well, what would players want to do in Draenor, what really makes sense, and building on some of the concepts that we introduced with the farm, right? Like, we knew that, well, players really they like that sense of ownership of the world, and how can we do more with that? We had this idea, at first we called them frontier forts. And we're like, well, what if you could build up a fort, and that really, that idea, that core kernel, the idea progressed more into, well, what would you do with it, and how would that work, and what would it be? And as it kept going, we started to see that, what? This is actually kind of a more, in a lot of ways, this is a more Warcrafty way of doing housing, because we're effectively building a Warcraft base in the game. Because one of the things that we always wrestled with housing it's not just the production of like, okay, well, you've got to create all the different ways that people can customize a house, which is a ton of work, but it's also, well, what do you do with it, right? And that was the question that we never felt like we had satisfactorily answered for Warcraft. We never got really this good sense of what you would do in your house that felt like it had any relationship to the World of Warcraft. So we felt like we sort of wound up there with Garrisons, and so far I've been really happy with how it's progressed.
Okay, just to move away slightly from the background of the new features, a bit on the mechanics. Obviously we're having the item stat squish. Again, similar to the player character changes. Do you think that'll be well received? Obviously we know it'll be basically the equivalent power, but there's always that perception that bigger numbers are better, and people are used to big numbers these days. So what were the thinking there as well?
Well, we certainly went into it knowing that there would be some players that would not want to see numbers get smaller. I think that for the most part, my impression is that players have accepted that part of it and feel okay about it. Certainly, I have found that after you play with it for 20 minutes, you're acclimated to it and you forget all about it, and then the numbers are just numbers. So I think that it works pretty well in that regard. I think the one that has actually been much harder for us to pull off is the pruning the characters down to a more manageable number of abilities. It's interesting because we never really master planned this when we were designing classes. I remember that as we got near the release of World of Warcraft, the original World of Warcraft, Rob Pardo and I used to talk a fair amount about how we were going to sustain this going forward. And we knew that, like, okay, well, we have all these abilities that you earn from level 1 to level 60, and presumably as we raise the level cap for expansions, more and more will come. And we're like, but we already feel like we have enough, and any more is really going to be out of control. I mean, it already took, like, we started off with the game thinking that you would only need 1 action bar, and quickly blew that out of the water. Even when we launched the game, you already needed multiple action bars, and then it was like, well, that's clearly not sustainable. But it always became a problem for future us. It was like, well,
someone will figure it out.
Yeah, we'll have a stroke of genius later on. And the reality is that players have this kind of Warcraft being an RPG means that players have this sort of built-in notion that things are always going to continue to build and build and build and build. But when it comes to the gameplay of a character class, that's not sustainable. So at some point we had to make this hard decision to bring the design back to being something that feels well designed. I would say that I would characterize our character classes as gotten kind of out of control over the last decade, and I'm just as guilty of it as anybody on the team. Totally, exactly. But at some point, there's a reckoning.
Well, it has to come up.
Yeah.
Sort of on a similar thing to that, with changing the number of abilities, we've also got rid of some of the background stats, like the old hit and expertise and stuff like that. Is it a similar thinking behind that to streamline some of that?
It is. I think there's only so many stats that players want to mentally juggle. I think that what players really like about stats is when they have a distinct purpose and they feel good and satisfying. Critical Strike was always a good example of that, and it was always our goal to try to make sure that the stats felt meaningful and distinct. And then we need them to use them to vary up the itemization, right? Because you don't want, well, this shoulder pad is exactly the same as the other pair of shoulder pads. Why would I want that?
No, that makes sense. Just to go back with regards to the pruning of the class mechanics, is there anything that's coming in Warlords that you're really happy with, that seems to work really well, a particular class or a particular new skill or anything like that?
Overall, I'm a lot happier with where the classes are, pretty much any given spec. I think that probably the most dramatic one that we did is with the Arms Warrior, because in a lot of ways the design of the Arms Warrior, in my opinion, had kind of lost its way over the years, and had, in a lot of ways, stopped feeling like what the Arms Warrior had felt like when we had launched the game. And inevitably, I don't. It's hard to identify any single decision that seems like, well, that idea was a bad idea or a bad decision at the time. It's the accumulation of all the stuff, right? And one decision leads to another, which leads to another. It's like this domino effect of ending up in a place where it's like, well, stances mean nothing, so they're out the door. Rage is no longer something that that feels different mechanically than energy, for example. It's a different color bar, right? And so I felt like it had kind of lost its way a little bit over time and lost its identity. And so that one's a more dramatic change, kind of back to how it was. An Arms Warrior in Warlords of Draenor feels a lot more like it did back in Vanilla or Burning Crusade. Some people will love that, some people may not. It's certainly a bigger change.
That was another point. It's like, what do you, when you're making these decisions and you're changing the class and stuff, again, how much are you keeping the current player base thinking about them? As in, no one likes to have to relearn their class every time, and we know that every time there's an expansion there'll be the usual, I don't like it anymore, and things like that. Well, how much of that do you keep in there?
Yeah, and we do get some of that with pretty much everything, with any expansion, with the character class stuff in general, whether we're changing it too little, too much, or whatever. So we do expect to hear that, and we as much as possible, we try to make sure that we balance what we're hearing from our players against what we're experiencing for ourselves as people developing the games. It's kind of this shared ownership of the game in general. But we, as designers, often, we need to trust our instincts, and, when we kind of rework the design, if we end up being happy with where it ends up, then we're pretty confident that a lot of players out there will like it too.
Well, there's always, I guess, the small number that make a lot of noise, aren't they? You can never please everybody, can you? That's very true. Just another bit to look at with in the new expansion. Obviously, your background's from PvP side as well. I know you're heavily involved.
Yep.
There seem to be a lot of changes coming to the PvP bit with the new zone, the Ashran, and seems to me to be a lot of encouragement to try and get that a smoother transition from your PvE to the PvP. Is that kind of behind that thinking with the strong boxes and stuff?
There definitely is. We definitely want there to be a freer flow between PvE and PvP, so that you don't feel like, well, I've done a lot of raiding or whatever, but my character is useless in PvP, so I don't want to start, and vice versa. But with Ashran, more than anything else, we're really trying to recapture a lot of what people miss about World PvP. We're trying to create a place that does not feel like a structured battleground. And it's interesting because what we find is that players will always push us to take any content and turn it into a structured battleground, but then tell us, well, I really miss World PvP. And I realize that those are completely contradictory concepts. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, what we've tried to do is build an area that would be fun to just kind of go out and play in with or without PvP, and that there will be reasons for PvP to naturally occur, whether it's because you can, you know, take currency from your enemy, or if it's because you just want to give them a hard time. So as long as we kind of bring players into natural conflict with each other, PvP will kind of happen on its own. And I think it will feel more like World PvP than when we try to do things like Wintergrasp, where it's like kind of a battleground, kind of not a battleground. It's just sort of a weird in-between to where it doesn't end up feeling like World PvP.
No, I must admit, it's convincing me. I'm not much of a PvPer, but I'm looking at it thinking, actually, that sounds like a lot of fun. I could be told on that one.
Right on.
So, when you mentioned Wintergrasp as well, I mean, is this basically the next transition from that? Or are we going to see anything like Wintergrasp again? I mean, I must admit that's something that I think everyone did appreciate at the time, and Tol Barad was supposed to be, you know, kind of similar, but didn't quite seem to pan out that way. So
yeah, I would say that this really is our kind of next crack at that. And rather than, we actually, I think in a lot of ways, in retrospect, we went the wrong direction with it with Tol Barad, in that we actually tried to focus more on the battleground-like gameplay, right? The capturing of the 3 different objectives, and that's not what World PvP wants to be. World PvP wants to be more freeform and more spontaneous. Yet at the same time, something that I think was successful about Wintergrasp was just the epic feel of it, right? The number of people with the giant fortress and the vehicles and blasting away, breaking down the walls.
Frame rate go down to single figures.
Yeah, exactly. So that to me, that was the successful point of Wintergrasp, was just that feel.
Just with regards, and obviously going back to, as you said, you've been there for over 10 years now, and obviously there was an announcement the other week about the 10th anniversary stuff. I think everyone's quite excited to go back to Molten Core. Was there anything else that kind of you were thinking about doing but didn't quite make the cut, or was going to do instead? Are you allowed to say?
No, well, we talked about a lot of different stuff, and we settled on things that felt most appropriate for the 10-year and were also achievable. We have some other ideas that we might leverage in some other future anniversary.
That's spoiling. That's cool. I like the pet as well. What are you actually planning to do on the 10th anniversary yourself? Are you going to play, or
I'll definitely be playing.
Are you going to be there doing it? Cool.
Yeah.
And do you think you'd still be working in Warcraft in another 10 years? I mean, that seems to be the question. Do you think it's got the legs to keep going?
Yeah, well, I definitely believe that it has the legs in general to keep going. You know, we have a lot of different ideas for different projects at Blizzard that are related to Warcraft, World of Warcraft, all that kind of stuff, that are also things that I could see myself ending up working on. So hard to say whether that'll be the case for me, but you know, I definitely think we'll see more expansions to come after Warlords even.
Cool. And I guess my final question: how do you deal with the pressure? Obviously, you make all these decisions. You know, there's millions of people. You know, we've talked about it before. What do you do in the end? You know, some people are going to be unhappy. How do you cope with that? I suppose you don't look on Twitter and go, "Oh my God."
Totally. I think that at the end of the day, you've got to focus on trying to build a game that you're proud of. And I think that if the team can look at the expansion that we created and whether we feel like, did it have character, did it have a soul, was it fun, was the gameplay, well conceived and implemented, then I think that whatever happens with the player base happens, right? I think when we were creating World of Warcraft, we never for a second imagined we could end up with even 5 million players, right? But yet there we were, but that's not really the focus. We were trying to create what we thought was the best MMO, and as long as we continue to do that, then people will say what they say, but we can be proud of what we worked on.
They will come, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, that's lovely. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Tom. Thanks for that.
Thank you.